How we doing, guys? It's Mr. Sturz and I'm checking in. Today's LAQ is explain how carrying capacity is set by birth rate and death rate and immigration and emigration. So what we're looking at today is we're going to be looking at ecosystems and changes that can affect these ecosystems based on these type of factors. So first, when we talk about carrying capacity, you have to know exactly what carrying capacity is. So looking at this picture here, as you notice in this graph, carrying capacity is this purple line. It goes all the way up and it finally hits like as high as it can go and then evens out. So that's the amount or the carrying capacity of that ecosystem. Now notice though, within the ecosystem, it kind of went above carrying capacity, then back down, below it, then above. So it's not always exact. It doesn't hit a capacity and then just stay like that for the whole time. It goes above and below. But what carrying capacity is it's the number of organisms that an ecosystem can support. So once again, go to that graph, that purple line up here, that's the number of organisms that ecosystem can support. Something more than that, something's going to happen in that ecosystem because it can't support that many organisms. If it goes below it, well, then we know that it can eventually rise back up because it can have a little more. So carrying capacity there is the number of organisms that an ecosystem can support. And one thing you have to know with carrying capacity is there's kind of a formula, it's not really an exact mathematical formula that you need to know for it. But what it is that birth rate plus immigration is equal to death rate and emigration. And you may be going, man, what is immigration and emigration? Or maybe what's birth rate and death rate? Maybe those words you haven't used before. But birth rate is just the amount of births in a certain amount of time. And death rate is the amount of deaths, obviously, in a certain amount of time. And emigration is what we're going to look at next. So looking at this picture, you can kind of get a feel of what emigration and immigration is. So what emigration is, with an E, is it's exiting one place to move into another region. So you notice here, these geese or a bunch of goose are flying off and they're exiting into another region. So a quick way to remember emigration with the E is just remember that it's exiting. Emigration for exiting. So it's exiting one place to move into another. Now, what about immigration? So immigration, on the other hand, is a migration into a new region. So these geese back here in this picture exited the region to immigrate into this new region. So that goes back to that formula that we talked about earlier, where it's birth rate plus immigration equals death rate plus emigration. So it's the amount of organisms being born into an ecosystem plus the amount of organisms that migrated into the ecosystem has to be equal to the amount of deaths in that ecosystem and the amount of organisms exiting that ecosystem. So that's how carrying capacity works there. Now, let's look at limiting factors, biotic and abiotic limiting factors. So we've looked at food webs and food chains, and we talked about what would happen, per se, if one organism died off, what would that do to the food chain? Everything would go crazy and all these organisms would be in a lot of trouble and so on. But there are factors that can actually make that happen. They can actually, hurt an ecosystem or if, something like that. So when we first look at limiting factors are factors that limit the growth of an ecosystem. So that definition kind of goes in hand with the word itself, limiting, so it limits the growth of an ecosystem there. And there's two different types. Obviously, you got the biotic over here and the abiotic over here. So looking at biotic factors, sorry about my squiggly arrow over there, I'm not very artistically gifted. Biotic factors are just limiting factors that are living. So plants, animals, bacteria, fungus, protists, those examples, those are all biotic factors because they're living. Where on the other hand, with a much better line there, abiotic factors are limiting factors that are non-living: water, light, minerals, air, soil. So those are all examples of limiting factors that limit the growth of an ecosystem. But just remember that the biotic are living and the abiotic are non-living. So that brings a close to our video for today. Make sure you answer that LEQ for your summary there about explaining how carrying capacity is set by birth and death rate and emigration and immigration. This is Mr. Striz signing out. Thank you.